All right, everyone, enough of my green room banter with Matthew Fairburn, considering I'm already 5 minutes late. It is 8:10 p.m. here tonight on Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. The Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. We know there's NHL playoff hockey on. We don't care. This show is available live, but also once we're done. So we are going to just dive right into a lot of the latest and greatest happenings today. Matthew Fairburn tweeted before we came on air tonight that it was a busy day. And I'm wondering, was it really busy or not? But we'll get into all that. I'm Kris Baker. I'm here as always with The Athletic's Matthew Fairburn. You can find Matthew's work at theathletic.com/sabres, where you might be able to get a wrap up of some of the moves that the Sabres made today in their front office. And we're going to get to that on your way in. Like this video, you can subscribe to the channel while you're here. Hit the notification bell so you know when Matthew and I go live. This podcast is also being streamed out on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it tonight. Matthew, real quick, is it just like X the symbol, but it's still called Twitter? Or did they really just change the name? Do you ever think about that?
I think they changed the name, but they've never changed that you can just type in twitter.com and it'll take you right to the site. So I think they changed the name. I think so much so that we had to stop referring to it as Twitter, I think, in articles at some point. It was like, we need to make this transition, but it'll kind of always be Twitter to me.
Well, whatever the hell we're calling it, you can find us there. And if you want to hop over to the YouTube chat, it's already hopping. You can go live there on YouTube and get into the discussion with your fellow fans. It is always moving. I see it out of the corner of my eye. It's moving. It's already moving tonight. Hop on over if you're watching on Twitter, X, or whatever the hell we're calling it. Oh, and lastly, as part of the housekeeping, as always, you can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could, please leave a 5-star review. Tonight on the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show, the Sabres moved down in the NHL draft lottery. And along the way, we're going to ask a question, Bowen or Owen. Going to play a little game. But first, Kevyn Adams staying in his role as general manager, perhaps to the chagrin of Sabres Nation, but of no surprise to me. But he also added to his staff today with perhaps more moves on the way. So, Matthew, I'm going to kick it over to you. Formally saying good evening to you, Matthew. And let's just talk a little bit about the front office news that came really today, yesterday. Kind of give us a timeline and what you're hearing.
Yeah, it's kind of been trickling out, I guess, in the last few days. Credit to Andrew Peters and Craig Rivet getting the ball rolling on, I think it was Tuesday morning, tweeting out that Kevyn Adams was coming back. The first sort of hint we got of it was that he was, all dressed up for the NHL draft lottery broadcast on Monday night. So, you knew he hadn't, he was still in the job as of then, right? But
his recurring role on lottery night,
right? Yes, he is a featured guest seemingly every year. I think every year since he's had the job.
I think they put him in center square.
I don't
Hollywood
know
Squares, a lot of squares this year.
I don't know if he has been on that broadcast every night, but he's certainly qualified to be on the broadcast every night. So he is coming back. They announced this morning that Eric Stahl has been hired as a special assistant to the general manager. His first front office job of his post-playing career. You might remember Eric Stahl from the 32 games he played for your Buffalo Sabres. You also might remember him as one of the Carolina Hurricanes who kicked the fan base and the collective nuts some 20 years ago. On their way to the Stanley Cup, the Hurricanes. So he is a former teammate of Kevyn Adams. They won the Stanley Cup together. He played here briefly in a vacuum. We'll get into that, of the hire, but bringing in, that's the type of guy that you would like to target. But the other interesting piece of this is, Elliot Friedman's report. Well, before that, they did also fire their strength coach, Ed Gannon, head strength coach anyways. How much they rework that staff remains to be seen. Coaching changes, I believe, still to be determined. Nothing yet final. I think they're still going through that. So, but the new strength coach, that will be, it's an interesting place to put blame or to assign blame, but I think people have brought it up on this show or asked questions about, the recurring injuries or even the fact that they wore down late in games, different things like that. So the other piece of this is Elliot Friedman reporting that they are sort of poking around at senior advisor candidates, somebody who has been in the chair, somebody who would report to Kevyn Adams. So that's the latest clue, I guess, of what the structure might look like this season. But the fact that they're continuing to maybe reinforce this front office gives a little bit of maybe the first indication that Terry Pegula is, I don't know if losing patience with, he's certainly not as patient with Kevyn Adams right now as he was a few years ago, but he's starting to insulate the front office a little bit and maybe have some, putting some trust somewhere else. We'll see. It kind of depends if they follow through with that and who they bring in, and we can get into some names and ideas for who would make sense in that role. But at the very least, this is not nothing, but all the news we have right now is a new strength coach will be coming in, and Eric Stahl, who has zero front office experience to date, will be coming in to report to Kevyn Adams, and he will be dealing with prospects and players, doing some scouting, kind of doing a little bit of everything. He is from Ontario, so presumably if he's not living right here, I would assume he'll be here quite a bit if he's dealing directly with players. So that's where it stands right now. But anybody hoping, as we talked last week, the longer it went on, the more it was becoming clear that Kevyn Adams probably wasn't going to go anywhere. And now I think we've got that confirmation, and at least allows us to go forward with thinking about what other moves they can make to strengthen this front office, and then what they do to fix this roster.
First on Kevyn, then on Stahl. Did you think that this whole past couple of weeks, really since the season-ending press conference happened, that maybe the whole thought that Kevyn was going to not be brought back or was not safe was maybe overblown a little bit? Like, were his words maybe misconstrued from his press conference? Or I think he kind of maybe framed it one way, but maybe it took on a different life.
Yeah, I don't think he meant to frame it as such an uncertain thing. And the way he was asked directly if he'd been given assurance, it was sort of a lose-lose, I guess, if he came out and said he legitimately had not had his review. Kind of same as any of us that, before you have that, I think he was sitting up there knowing, if he talks to Terry Pegula every day, knowing pretty well where he stands, but not necessarily wanting to come off brazen of course I'll be back or anything like that. So I think he was trying to be, a little bit more, subdued in that way. And it was taken as that there was maybe more uncertainty than there really was. But it all goes back to the somewhat unpredictable nature of Terry Pegula in general as an owner. And getting close to him and his decision-making process is not exactly simple. So, and he changes his mind from time to time. I think for most, in the weeks leading up to the end of the season, there was chatter, other colleagues of mine asking, that this has got to be it, right? Or, different people around the league even wondering what's going to happen in Buffalo. Like, there was legitimate curiosity from, other front office members and people kind of trying to scope out what was going to happen. And I always thought, well, pump the brakes, because Kevyn is Terry Pegula's guy. And, we don't have indication, it's hard to know, what it would look like if he were getting fired, but we didn't have a ton of indication that he was on some sort of hot seat, just the way he was talking, the way he was behaving, some of the comments at the deadline, the trade at the deadline. So Is it a shock to me that he's coming back? No, but I've certainly been, as we talked last week, it's like you go into off-season mode, but you don't really go into off-season mode. You're sort of always on edge in this business, wondering if the other shoe is going to drop at some point or if minds are going to change. But seems now that things are crystallizing a little bit, and at least it's pretty clear that Kevyn is going to be back in that chair. Kris appears frozen. So I'm going to jump into the chat while Kris is frozen. Kris, I thought, paid his internet bill. He was pretty smooth for a while, but he apparently is still behind on his internet bill. We've got a lot already to get into here in the chat. And I think I'll jump right into Eric Stahl, because I think the biggest question people have here is, there's Kris. He's back. He got on the phone with his internet reps and he's back. We're getting into Eric Stahl here. A lot of questions in the chat already, and a lot of people that responded to me on social media saying, Kevyn Adams just hired his friend, gave an old teammate a job. This isn't meaningful change. And if this is all that they do this summer, I would probably agree with that, because it's not nothing, but it's not substantial either, right? You don't want Eric Stahl necessarily coming in and making the determination on guys like JJ Peterka or Bowen Byram, these big questions, this guy who doesn't have experience in this role. But he is the type, he has the pedigree as a player that you would look for as somebody to transition. Jason Spezza making a similar transition, started off in Toronto. He's now with Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh. Vinny LeCavalier, I believe, is, kind of in a similar stage in his career, maybe a few years ahead here of Stahl. So I don't have a problem with that. And I think, you look at, he had an unbelievable career as a player and should be able to provide some good guidance to players if that's his role, and some good input, I would think, to Adams. It's certainly much different than people he's surrounded himself with in the past, right? I
A little
think
bit more of a threat maybe down the road, right?
potentially. I
Potentially,
mean,
once he develops, his front office chops, right?
a guy that was a much better player than Kevyn, right? A guy that has more cachet, I would think, in league circles.
Oh,
and
respect from his peers as
Right.
a player and coaches and executives and agents, probably. I think the respect factor is huge, and that's a differentiator. But continue, sorry.
And so that does make him somewhat probably of a potential threat, which I don't think. I think one of the issues, I guess, with the way they've built out this front office is that there aren't enough people who would pose a legitimate threat. I compare it to the front office that Brandon Beane built when he first got here in 2017. And within the span of a few years, I forget exactly who was there when, but like Dennis Hickey was one of his first hires, a former GM. Brian Gain, who I believe interviewed for the job when Beane did, Beane ends up hiring him, as an assistant. He goes and gets a GM job. Brandon Beane brings him back again after he got fired by the Texans. Joe Shane, longtime friend of Brandon Beane, but also a riser in the front office ranks and is now a GM. And then he hired Dan Morgan, which I believe was a year or two in, who was rising up the scouting ranks fast. Like, people really,
it was almost like a coup when the Bills got Dan Morgan, right?
Yeah, and he is like the ultimate alpha, like, football guy, right? Middle linebacker, legendary player, badass of a dude, super, really nice guy, but just this guy that had GM written all over him, basically, from the time he started. He started from the bottom, being an area scout and kind of grinding it out. But Brandon Beane has always surrounded himself that way. Even look at Sean McDermott hiring Leslie Frazier, recognizing a guy that had been in the chair and had made some of his own mistakes could lend some guidance in his first time as a head coach. And then compare it to the staff that Kevyn Adams built out with the Sabres, which in his first year was basically nobody, right? Jeremiah Crow and a few others that had not done the work before, had not really been in the
A lot of
chair.
first timers.
And, he goes and gets Carmanos, who I think at least had some front office experience, but not a guy that's based in Buffalo, not a guy that's around him, certainly from the standpoint of perceived threat, very low.
Not
Brandon
a guy that
Beane,
was going to buddy up with Terry.
no, exactly. Well, not when you don't live here, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
so, I think Brandon Beane's staff had a lot of potential threats, and Brandon Beane wasn't afraid. He wanted as many smart people, experienced people around him as you could get. He wanted an all-star staff, and you look at guys from that front office get interviews around the league. Still, there's still guys that are Terrence Gray could be next to get one. I mean, there's been other guys too. So if this is the first step towards Terry Pegula recognizing that's what's needed, because let's remember that they're in a much different financial position as a franchise, as a business, than they were in 2020 when they first hired Adams. And they're not in a much better, but it is better, right? It's not worse. That fans have come back into the building, not to the rate that, the Sabres would have hoped, but they are back. And the winning hasn't happened yet, so they haven't been able to fill the building. So are they swimming it? They're not getting playoff revenue, but the business is not in dire straits the way it was during the pandemic, where there was so much uncertainty and building out a staff wasn't necessarily front of mind. Maybe this is a sign that Terry Pegula is recognizing the need to fortify this front office a bit. Now, if you're sitting there frustrated that Terry Pegula hasn't recognized that he should start from scratch, I hear you. Like, I think if you've listened to this show long enough, you know that, we hear you on that and largely agree, given the results that they've had. This is the situation we're dealing with, though, right now. And they are slowly starting to maybe build this thing out a little bit. I mean, a senior advisor would be a really nice addition. I don't think anybody would argue with that, depending on the person, frankly, regardless almost of the person, because somebody who's been in the chair, somebody who has made mistakes, somebody who has had some success and kind of knows what it looks like and can help them garner a little bit of respect around the league, maybe within their own locker room, just get some of that back and start operating this thing a little bit differently. If this is the first step towards that, then okay. But this is not winning over a lot of people on its own. And even a senior advisor that reports to Kevyn Adams is probably not winning over a lot of people. This is very much going to be a put up or shut up year for fans. It's going to be win, or they're not going to be fooled by much that happens between now and October. And boy, do I wonder if they're going to introduce the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres, as they tend to do each year on opening night. And he was booed last year at opening night, and I can't even imagine what that would be like if they did so again in October. Can't imagine it'd be very pretty.
Yeah, on Eric Stahl, I mean, I do think that they added some respect. He's unproven. Well, first of all, I think for anyone that says it's nepotism, maybe, but when you're a former player and you get into a front office job and you're kind of breaking in, that's generally how it works, is you work your network. It's very, that's generally how it works. You see a lot of these players that get jobs, and you mentioned a couple names already. Spezza, there's a bunch of them. They're all over the place. A lot of them in player personnel. Langenbrunner, you look down at Dallas, Rich Beverly's there. There's guys sprinkled all over the place that have played in the league, and they get in, and it's likely because of who they know, relationships that, from their playing days when they were, in that franchise, in the locker room playing for that team, and they move up to the front office. For Stahl, I don't know what to think of it, because I don't know what the hell he's going to do. Special assistant, to me, it sounds like it's more player personnel oriented, but it's couldn't it sound more broader when they announced it in terms of what his role is going to be. So let's see what he does. It's hard to judge it. Honestly, I like the credibility that comes with the name. It's a start, but really, is it going to move the needle for anything? I don't know. Let me figure out what he's going to do, but let's see what they do with the senior advisor position. that's where the needle moves. That's where Kevyn, like right now, what we're hearing, bringing Stahl in is remediation. The referendum is when they bring in a senior advisor and who that person is. And do they end up reporting to Kevyn? Elliot Friedman could report it. Does it really go down that way? Say there's this amazing candidate that says, yeah, I want to come and help you, but I'm not reporting to him. I want to report to the owner. That could possibly happen. We don't know. So like, let's just kind of, I don't want to go all the way down. Like we see how they sketched it up in some slide deck that was presented over multiple days. Cause that's also part of this. Like, holy shit. You talk to him every day and then it took multiple days. All right. What have you been talking about all year? What have you been talking about all year?
What is there to go over?
Yeah.
But
so, and listen, like I didn't expect Kevyn to be moved, but I do think that they sketched it out, but let's see what really happens. I'm kind of trying my best to reserve judgment until we find out who that senior advisor is and what the reporting structure is. And then I think we have a clear picture of how they're going to execute. Kevyn can sketch it out. He's not going to put it on there and say, yeah, we're going to get an advisor who's going to report to me. Terry's going to be like, great. Meanwhile, Terry is also, to your point, seen how the Bills have operated and said, okay, at any cost, let me just get someone in here that knows what the hell's going on. And maybe he does need to report to me. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there for thought. You never know.
How much would it really cost, right? I think that's the other piece of this, especially a senior advisor. We're not really talking about a president of hockey operations, although, you talk to the right people and like you said, the right candidate wants to report to Pegula.
Depends on who it is, right?
Everything depends on who it is. It's why I say like this step, if it is a step towards strengthening this front office in different ways, if there are, there's still some stuff up in the air, I think, about who could return and who might not. Jason Carmanos, maybe does, maybe doesn't return. And then you have, I think there's still some moving pieces here. So I want to see the whole picture before I really, and again, I am saying all this recognizing that the best move, like we all agree on what the best move would have been, but this is what they're doing. So what is the best version of what they're doing? Well, I think, yes, having somebody with some experience in would help add some credibility to this front office. And to your point, if they are serious about going down that road and they really do start interviewing or really talking to some people in depth, things can change really quickly. It can be, like you said, Kevyn Adams saying, let's bring in a senior advisor. He'll report to me and, I'll bounce some ideas off him just as a way to take some heat off himself. Like, I need this now, even though really he needed it 5 years ago. But that could happen. But if Pegula is talking to a person and says, you know what, yeah, I do want this person to report to me, that person could be called senior advisor. If he's reporting to Terry Pegula, he might as well be the president of hockey ops, right?
Right.
Right. And I think if he can get Terry's ear, that's the big danger to Kevyn Adams. He's the one with Terry's ear. And if somebody else can have it, right now, Lindy Ruff also has it. That was probably the big danger, quote unquote, from Kevyn's standpoint of bringing Lindy Ruff in. And that was not just a Kevyn Adams thing. Obviously, Terry Pegula had a pretty big hand in that, but he has a ton of respect, that being Terry Pegula, for Lindy Ruff. If he develops a similar, affinity for one of these candidates, then that could change things. That could change. I remember when they hired Sean McDermott and I'm not relating everything to the Bills, but it's the best clue we have sometimes to the way
completely
Terry Pegula is going to operate. But when he hired Sean McDermott, the idea going into that search was not necessarily for a head coach to have a ton of power. But McDermott went into an interview room, for it's either his first or second interview. Whatever it was, Whaley was in the room to start. And he asked him to leave. And just Sean and Brandon, or Sean and not Brandon, Sean and Terry were in there, and Kim probably. Maybe it was Russ Brandon still around at that time. Whoever it was Whaley had to leave the room. And by the time Whaley got back in the room, Sean McDermott not only had the job, he had control of the 53-man roster. So, point being, Terry met the right guy and changed what he thought. And from there, a couple months later, he wiped out the whole front office. And what was a pretty emotional, I don't know if I would compare it 1-to-1, but Terry Pagula was close with Doug Whaley. They got along really well. And I don't know if it was quite the level that Kevyn Adams and Terry, their relationship, but that wasn't easy for Terry Pagula. But he met the right person, the right candidate, saw how he was changing the culture in the building, and leaned all the way into it. If he talks to the right person that wins him over, now there's a lot of debate too over what type of person could actually win Terry Pagula over, because he wants to be heard. He wants to be involved. Certain personalities have rubbed him the wrong way in the past. So, we'll see how this all plays out and whether he can get the right person and a qualified person, or anybody at all, right? Because at this point, it's just a mention from Elliot Friedman. It's not, he mentioned a few weeks ago that Kevyn Adams' title might be changing. So, I know Elliot Friedman's rock solid, but, like I said, guessing exactly what Terry Pagula is going to do is not easy business. I know, because it's my business. So I think that how this all unfolds will be pretty interesting. We know that Kevyn Adams is coming back. What we don't know is what it'll all look like around him.
Yeah. Now, my whole thing, so I look at my professional life. I don't talk about it here very much. I'm not going to go too in depth, but I'm in a leadership role in a very large company. I report to a VP. If I go to my VP and say, hey, I have a plan, I need some help, I'm going to bring some candidates in. But yeah, of course, I'm going to sketch it out where they're going to report to me. But when those interviews start and there's someone that's really qualified that knows my industry, and they're like, holy shit, yeah, we're going to maybe bring him in kind of next to you, dotted line maybe to you, but really on the hard line is going to be to the VP. When I look at the Sabres situation, so again, Kevin's going to, of course, sketch it up that way. It's going to be very easy for someone to come in here, though, that's been in the chair, right, that has the experience. It's going to be very easy for Terry Pagula to potentially be enamored with that person. Kevin's in kind of a tough situation here, but it is the right move. I'm actually saying good on Kevyn, if this was his idea, to just get the job done at any cost and not necessarily just be only protecting your ass.
He's in a tough situation, but let's be honest, he's still employed. So he's in a great situation, right? I mean, I think a lot of general managers, 5 years, no playoffs, no finish higher than 20th, and going backwards 2 straight seasons. I think we would all say it's a great position to be in, if you still have your
100%.
job. To your point, maybe there is a little bit of desperation now of saying, okay, this isn't working, and I need to come up with something to, solve this, and my presence alone, isn't going to do it. And look, I've said it a lot. This is a really fascinating team, and the way this is all working is really interesting to me. So how it all shakes out over the next, few weeks, few months, I'm interested to see it play out. And I'm not against believing that they could, the odds are not in their favor with Kevyn Adams calling the shots that they will make the playoffs, because he hasn't figured it out yet. And there's a lot of big decisions coming. But this is a weird league too, right? Half the teams make the playoffs. It's a statistical anomaly that they've missed 14 years in a row. So I'm also not sitting here on May 7th saying there's no chance they make the playoffs because Kevyn Adams is coming back. So the rest of what happens in that front office and how it all works, and then, of course, what they do with the roster is what's really going to determine that. I understand why people wouldn't have confidence. I more so say that I'm not ruling anything out on May 7th. And like you said, I kind of want to see how this all plays out and see how it all comes together and what we're dealing with in July or really June. What does it look like ahead of the draft? And then maybe beyond that, maybe even after, they reshuffle some more things leading into the season. But pretty fascinating.
I want to know whose idea it really was. They're going to say that they came to the conclusion together that this is the move they need to make to kind of tune up the front office. The Eric Stahl one was obviously Kevin's. Who the senior advisor role, whose idea really was it? Because we looked at, you have Pagula's firsthand knowledge of how the Bills front office has functioned. And And I wonder about that. We don't have to answer it. I just really do wonder. Am I giving Kevyn too much credit? Saying it was his idea, or did Terry make him?
You absolutely could be giving him too much credit. Did Terry make him, or here's another idea? And I don't know. So this is, just throwing ideas around, but could it have been Lindy Ruff's idea? Like
Yeah.
let's bring in another voice here. I don't
He
have
walked in like
time.
Paul Maurice.
Right. Yeah.
He's like,
pay attention.
You bleepers, pay attention. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Could have just said, I don't have time to be your senior advisor. So, let's get somebody else in here like I'm trying to be for this, young, inexperienced coaching staff. Bring somebody of my, and he's got a network. So the idea could have come from many different places. It could have come as a collective, it could have been a question at some point, like from Terry, like, do you need this? At one, obviously they haven't had one in his tenure. So he has sort of been on an island in a lot of ways. And, there's been a few people in the chat. I'm trying to keep up out of the corner of my eye. A few concerns of too many voices, right? This is adding another voice, but they still don't have any of the right voices. I would say that, like, I'm going to pull it up right now. Look at the Florida Panthers front office.
It's new blood, new prism. I'm willing to take the new voice, an extra voice here. Think tank it through. Hey, listen, when you watch those embeds, Matt, that room has room for more bodies. That boardroom that they're sitting in. Honestly.
It does. It's so when I listen to GM press conferences from time to time, end of season, trade deadline, just to get a sense of how other teams are operating, other general managers are operating and handling and speaking about their situations. And one thing that stood out about Bill Zito, and I was down there around the trade deadline because that's where the Sabres were, but he was talking about the debates they have in their pro scouting department, like the real fired up debates that they have. And they have, a pretty solid staff. They've got 2 senior advisors, Paul Fenton and Rick Dudley, a name that a lot of people are bringing up here. They've got Roberto Luongo as their special advisor to the general manager, which, seems sort of like the Eric Stahl role, probably. Mm-hmm. They have a senior vice president of hockey operations, an assistant general manager, an assistant general manager who's the head of analytics, and then another assistant general manager. So that's a lot of people around Zito, in addition to a 4-person. They have a director of salary cap, director of hockey operations and player evaluation, vice president of player engagement. They've got a pretty robust, and they have a data science team. But that pro scouting thing stood out to me because that's where I think Eric Stahl absolutely can help you as you're evaluating free agents.
So I see it as a player personnel type of role. Like when you contrast what you just listed with the Panthers, when you look at the Sabres, I don't have the front office up, but by memory, you have Kevyn, you have 3 AGMs, right? Jakubowski, who really just is the cap guy. Karmanos, who's mostly the AHL guy. And Jerry Fortin, who was just given that role, but really is your director of amateur scouting. He's over the whole scouting operation, I think. But, his pedigree is amateur scouting.
And then you have Jeremiah Crow, who didn't, had a couple years of pro scouting experience before he became essentially the director of all scouting at first when Adams took over. And as far as Eric Stahl types or Luongo types or Rick Dudley types, like they don't have those. So they don't have the same level of debate. I can't imagine that they do, that is happening. And the Florida Panthers are top 2 or 3 pro scouting in the league. Yes, we know that they have some advantages, right? That Kevyn Adams does not. Stanley Cup rings would be my first one. Yes, their weather and tax situations are a bit preferable. They've got a beautiful practice facility that they just opened. They've got Paul Maurice, who is very much a guy that people like to play for. But they have
we have Paul Hamilton.
That is true. I don't know.
We got Hammer.
I don't know if Kevyn Adams has ever used Paul Hamilton in his pitch to free agents. Be like, you
should.
ever heard of this guy? This guy's going to be asking you questions every day if you come sign here. Ask around about him. I think it would sell. I think it would win some people over. But like
Okay.
those debates that you want some of these experienced voices, and Eric
Yes.
Stahl has just played against all these guys. So maybe in terms of free agent or trade additions, this is a guy that can help. I mean, I get it. He's not any more qualified for the job, as far as his hockey operations experience, but he is he was a much better player and does have a certain cachet. And these jobs, this is how they start for a lot of these guys. I believe it's how Joe Sakic started. There's a few around the league, Luongo, as I just mentioned. So not bad to have. The idea of more voices to me doesn't bother me when it feels like too often the only voice has been Adams.
So speed round. So just to recap real quick, Stahl, we'll see, can't hurt, TBD, but more net negative or net positive than any net negative. I don't know what the negative would be. So we'll see. I get the nepotism thing, everything else. I just think that's how the game's played when you break in. When you look at the senior advisors, just maybe we do speed round here because we're already 36 minutes in. We got a couple other things we want to get to. So the thought is this is an opportunity for Terry Pegula to build his bench. He's going to get some bench strength here in the front office. 3 names. Do you have 3 for me?
Well,
and we could, just like, who's out there that fits like checks those boxes, was in a chair, a big chair.
Rick Dudley,
Mm-hmm.
but he's already in that same job with a Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah,
he does live locally, so I don't know. You'd have to give him a pay bump, or you'd have to have him report to the owner.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to convince him somehow. But this is a guy that I think would make sense. Ken Holland is available. Probably another one that I would, look at. I brought up this name to you. I was like half joking, but I don't know if it's the worst idea in the world. He has.
I love where you're going here.
He has
Go ahead,
familiarity with Lindy Ruff and Kevyn Adams, Darcy Regier. I mean, we're not talking about, of course you would like truly fresh perspective, but
get the band back together, baby.
It'd be like a movie, Darcy coming back with Lindy, and
they make the playoffs. Could you imagine?
It would be wild. Now he's been out of hockey for a while, so I don't know if it's something he'd even be open to. He's a guy that I've tried to get in touch with him for a few stories that have nothing to do with this, just like old, like Ryan Miller stories, different stuff, and he never responds. So I have no idea what he's up to, but those are a few guys off the top of my head. Darcy came to mind today because it was like, I mean, he has been in the chair. He's familiar with all these people, right? And also familiar with operating on not a big budget.
Yeah.
So this idea of, them not spending to the cap, maybe it wouldn't bother him so much. Maybe he'd be like, move over, Kevyn. I've done this before. Let me show you how to fly this plane. We'll land this thing. No more suffering. That would be wild.
So it's probably about 3:00 this afternoon. So just, news started to trickle out. Matt will be in the car. We'll get on the phone. It takes me away from my job. I like it. So thank you, Matt, when you call me. Later in the afternoon, you're like, here's a name. And you just did that without telling me who it was. And then you sent the picture of Darcy. And I actually started laughing. But then I also said out loud, I think I looked at my dog. I was like, I love that. I love that. I think, he's been out for a while. I mean, who knows, but I just think from an administrative perspective, and he's got a track record of, doing better than most of the stuff that the Sabres have had since he left the organization. Kind of interesting. 2 other names, Rob Blake, in terms of, again, that credibility, that cachet, that name, Olympian, cup winner. He was, he didn't get the LA Kings out of the first round of the playoffs, but I just think there's opportunity there. And I do like the idea of Jarmo Kekalainen, which of course, he was kind of sniffing around some Sabres Twitter a few months ago. Maybe there's fire to some of that smoke. Maybe it validates the calls that were made. Maybe that's how, a guy like Elliot Friedman was suggesting that there were going to be changes to, the front office around Kevyn. But either way, I think those are some other names to watch. The Darcy one, I'm going to circle back to that. It's funny. But man, would that be something? Would that be something? You want to talk about mixed reactions from the fan base? I haven't even looked at the chat. I don't even know what they're thinking. But man,
I have no
there are
idea.
more qualified candidates, by the way, but it's fine.
Certainly,
it's fine.
certainly.
I'm giving it more credibility than you probably were by mentioning it.
There were more qualified head coaching candidates, you could argue, last spring than Lindy Ruff. And so can we rule out anything at this point? Stranger things have happened, right? Including Kevyn Adams becoming general manager. Was not on the bingo card before that happened. So it's people who have been in that chair. It's an interesting, phrasing on Elliot Friedman's part, because of course you want somebody with experience, but as far as who would be interested and who has the right type of experience and the right temperament to fill that role. Like Rob Blake is so freshly in the decision-making chair. You want to talk about a threat? That would be a pretty big threat to Kevyn Adams.
Man, who's been in the chair, a chair that is not going to be have a more decorated resume than Kevyn Adams that comes into the organization?
Sure. They all
it's like they all are, right?
But some of them are of a certain age that, like Rick Dudley. It's been a while since Rick Dudley has been a general manager. So maybe that there's a little less of a perceived threat there.
That's what I want that's actually what I want. And that's why my immediate default is maybe this person, if you get the right guy in here, doesn't want to report to Kevyn. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Ken Holland, do you think he's going to call, hey, Kenny, it's Kevyn Adams. How you doing? You want to come report to me? He's going to be like, I don't know. No, probably not. Right?
Well, Ken Holland, will probably have options. So this is something where they will, I don't know that for sure, but it seems like a general manager gets fired, his name gets brought up, right? He's kind of, he's kind of lurking in some of these situations. So the Islanders are looking right now. The Kings are now looking. This is where the Sabres are going to have to move to get somebody. That the coaching market, which is why I think people shouldn't read too much into the fact that we haven't seen coaching changes yet, because the coaching market is really pretty wild. Mike Sullivan got hired quickly. David Carl seems to have removed himself again. But other than that, there's some big openings. When you're talking about big openings and big names that are out there, right? Tocchet leaving Vancouver. I mean, even Torts, right? He got fired, so he's out there. And there's these different big candidates beyond just Sullivan. You're talking about their staffs too, right? And who they might fill out. So a potential assistants that get a call from Lindy Ruff, like before they fire, whoever on the coaching staff, they're probably calling around to make sure, they've got a replacement ready. And there very well could be candidates out there saying, well, I'm going to wait and see where Sully lands, where Tocchet lands, where, who pick any of these people. Like there's a lot of stuff that has to shake out, including for, a popular name like Mike Peca, still figuring out where everything, how the dust settles in some of these different markets and jobs that are certainly more desirable than the situation that's happening in Buffalo right now.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too deep on the coaching staff right now. I mean, I think there's an opportunity to switch some things up and who's working with your defense. I've mentioned it before. I would give Jay McKee a call, just given the work that he did in the OHL the past few years. I know everyone's just like, another former player. Like, when can we get out of the Well, you get out of the former player vortex by having a Stahl come in, and then you have a different list of contacts that you could work. But like right now, Lindy's comfortability, maybe needing a succession plan. McKee's compelling, right? I'll just kind of leave it at that. We are 45 minutes in. If you could please, if you haven't already, hit that like button. I'd like 100 before we end the stream tonight. And I'm going to be up late. This is actually coffee. So if anyone thinks it's not, it's coffee. And that's going to really bite me in the ass. I know, when I'm trying to get to sleep.
I can't drink coffee like afternoon without it.
I shouldn't. I used to be able to conk out. I know. I used to be able to conk out, and now lately it's been keeping me up. So whatever. My dogs like it because we'll probably be up wrestling at 1 o'clock in the morning, watching YouTube podcasts. But anyways, hit that like button, subscribe, all that stuff. We got a couple more things we want to get to. Let's just dive right into the lottery. So the Sabres went in with the 7th best odds win the lottery. I think it was 6.5%. Keep me honest, Matt. I think it was 6.5% chance they had to get in the top pick. They went right down to the wire. Compelling TV, by the way.
Much better. Much better.
Much better, right? Okay, I'm glad we agree on something. But no, it was nice, right? It was kind of cool to see it happening in real time. And the Sabres are right there until the final ball. What do they need? A 2? I think it was a 2.
And instead they went backwards to 9, where they had a 5.6% chance entering the lottery to end up at 9th. So worse than their odds to get number 1. Very on brand for the season.
So they slid from Dylan Cousins, Eric Rasmussen territory to down to 9, where you get Paul Sear, blistering slap shot. Hardly ever on net. That was before your time, man. And Matthew Savoy. So kind of an interesting sample there. I think a lot of people are already saying Savoy, I think, is going to do something. Might not be, perennial all-star, but I think he's going to be a very serviceable player. Paul Sear played under 500 games in the NHL, but needless to say, that's just Sabres luck, right? That's just kind of how it goes. At 9, we'll have plenty of runway here leading up to the draft. I mean, we got a month and a half plus to kind of get into it. Opening thoughts from your perspective. I have guys, we can talk probably 6 or 7 players deep, very easy right now, that fans should dig into if they're not well-versed on this draft class. My thought, just real quick, Matt, before I let you kind of, share where you went in the Athletic mock draft. Once you get outside of like 5, I think every list is going to be different. I think it's going to be, you could say that a lot of years in the draft, I think especially this year. Defensemen are at a premium. You got the top pick, but then, we'll see what happens in the top 10 there as far as defensemen go. Very heavy forward draft. You got some good center prospects. You got some good winger prospects in the top 10. And my thought going into this, before we get into some specific names, it goes back to culture. It goes back to effort. It goes back to team first. This at the top club level hasn't had a problem scoring goals. They've had a problem playing a more team game, team toughness, culture, leadership. Those are the traits that I'm looking for. Of course, you have to be a good hockey player. But there are some guys there that I think check some of those culture, leadership, physicality, energy buckets. I'll shut up. Take on the lottery, take on 9, take on some players from your lens.
Yeah, we had our staff mock draft that we do after the lottery immediately, every year. And Brady Martin was the player I went with at 9, center from Sioux Greyhounds. He is perhaps the best of the first round prospects, the best in terms of physicality and, throwing his body around, body checker, and does it in a package that I think has enough skill. Victor Eklund was on the board when I made my pick, and I really went back and forth with it, but I just couldn't bring myself to take sort of a small-ish winger. Felt a little redundant, even though he doesn't quite play super small and, could be a really good player. It just felt like, especially at 9, you get outside those top, in the top 5, I'm not necessarily breaking a tie with the guy who's more physical, the guy who's going to be that culture driver. But this everything I read about this kid and watching his game, it seems like he's that type of guy. So sort of a guy I have circled. Scott Wheeler, our draft guy, thinks he could go as high as, 5. Like he could be a real riser, had a good showing at U18. So we'll see what happens. Does it diminish the quality of prospect they're going to get? Maybe slightly. I think the hope of Amisa or Hagens was really, that's what you're missing out on, right? You're not getting that type of player, but you've got some ideas.
I got some takes. Yeah. So number one on Eklund, Victor Eklund should not be there at 9, in my opinion. I just think he's too good of a player. I don't care about his measurables, his vitals. He does play bigger than 5'11", 165-ish. Might be closer to 170. Nikolai Ehlers, similar size, also went 9th overall. Nikolai Ehlers also, though, has had trouble staying healthy regularly, right? But I do think that Eklund, energy, I don't want to say twitchy because people say that and they're like, oh, well, now we're talking about football terms. No, like twitchy, you should be talking really about goaltenders anyways being twitchy. But Eklund is twitchy when how he changes directions and he makes people miss and he comes off the boards really fast and he gets a lot of shots on goal. I think he was second on his team. Shots on goal, I think he led his team in goals this year, playing second division in Sweden. He shouldn't be there. Martin, I agree, has been a riser all year. I like Martin, by the way. So anytime I talk to you specifically about Martin, I'm not trying to get you off of him or anything like that. The point that I think is kind of doesn't go well with me is like his under 18s were great, but it shouldn't vault him all the way up like 10 or 12 spots. Like if you were watching him all year, he was good all year. He shouldn't go that far up the board because he went to the net and scored goals at the under 18s for Canada on a down year for the USA. And you know what I mean? Like, so I think 5's aggressive, but 9 is not. I think you can look at him 7, 8, 9. I think when I was on with Duffer and Marty yesterday, I said, I think you can look at Martin at like 8. Now I know where Wheeler's going and I'm not discounting what he's saying. I just think for me, he shouldn't be overdrafted because he had a good tournament at the under 18s.
There's also, I think some of the calculus on Wheeler's end is some of the teams picking in that range too, right? And
this is a need.
The type
draft.
that they go for,
yep.
and the sort of archetype that they like to have in their building. And Nashville's one of those teams, Philly's one of those teams, Boston's one of those teams, and those are all teams picking ahead of the Sabres.
Boston, I think, would be all over Roger McQueen if they feel slightly comfortable with his medical, because you want to talk about 6'5", 200 pounds centerman. He's the big centerman. That is a Boston Bruin to me anyways.
McQueen was on the board when I made my pick. The injury scared me off enough. It was another one that was tough. Injuries aside, McQueen and Carter Bear really have jumped out to me, but they're two varying degrees of significant injury that I think will end up factoring in on some level for them.
I don't worry about Bear's injury. I know it's an Achilles. It's a lacerated Achilles, not a rupture, a little different. I don't worry about that as much. And everything seems to be very positive with Bear. Carter Bear is live for me at 9. Another guy, work ethic, culture, motor, front of the net, small area player, wicked shot, just does everything. You're never going to question his effort, but he's a winger. But like, I don't care. Just give me the right guy. Give me the right personality. Give me the right effort. Give me the guy that's not fixated on his points. He's going to go out there, kick ass, bust his ass every shift, and everything will just fall into place when you get a player like that. He's going to make his line mates better. Bear's in play for me in that spot. Radim Murka's in play. 6'6"-ish, 6'5.5", 6'6", defenseman, came over at the end of November from Czechia, played. So saw him a ton this year playing in front of Rats left, just got better and better. And right shot. Now you have Sturbach, you have Komarov, you have Kleber, who they drafted last year, another monster. Get another one. I don't care. Can never have too many. Currency, chips.
Well, and
a stack. I don't care.
You want to increase the odds that one of them hits, right? And you don't know for sure. how many of them will hit or if any of them will hit. So I think he was another name that I think he went 8 in our draft, but he was another name that I was eyeing. One thing that I think, the moving down to 9 probably kills the dream of Porter Martone falling, because there was some talk that maybe he could fall into that 5, 6, 7 range.
Well, that's another
And
Boston player. Okay, so if
but
McQueen's medical
again,
doesn't work, that's a Boston player.
right, he went
Not a
3
center
in our
though.
mock draft to Chicago. So, yeah, maybe the fact that he's a winger bumps him down. Maybe the fact that, Corey Proman writes about this quite a bit of, he's always prioritizing skating, right? And I think there is, he's following the patterns of the NHL and where teams tend to go and
I got a
how they
counter for that.
break tie. Well, I was going to say, I think in Matthew Tkachuk's draft year, that probably cost him a little bit.
Matthew Tkachuk, Brady Tkachuk, both of them.
So you do have to balance a little bit what else they do and not necessarily just fixate on skating, although certainly it is in the NHL now and really forever, I feel like has been at a premium. It is the most important thing you do on the ice, but there are other aspects that I think right now, particularly, you watch these playoffs, there's always recency bias baked into, all these pro leagues, they're copycat leagues, right? And you see what these teams are doing to win, and physicality is at a premium this time of year. Net front presence is at a premium this time of year, and teams don't really forget that. So they sit down to make their picks or set their board, and a guy like Martone is really going to stand out. A guy like Martin is going to stand out. McQueen is probably going, like Lindstrom last year had the back, and he ended up still going pretty high. So, there was a lot of buzz this time of year of how that might impact him. And so maybe the McQueen stuff is overblown. We'll see. But it's not a terrible spot for the Sabres. But moving down, are you even more willing to
Yeah,
open it up to a trade, right?
100%, especially like if you think you can get Bear at 14, 13, where you got Benson, right? But I think every scenario is on the table. Just a couple other things on these draft guys real quick though. McQueen, he's going to be on teams do not draft list, just like Caden Lindstrom was. I'm not convinced that the Caden Lindstrom scenario where it has helped Roger McQueen
probably
in this draft year. And we'll see what happens. Like Lindstrom's going to go and play in Michigan State next year. Could be fun. And it's a long game. And the Sabres, in a way, could maybe play a little bit of a long game here with whoever they take. So I'm curious what their medical looks like. For me, I want McQueen to go to like Boston or someone like that. It's almost like maybe I'm trying to will it into existence because that means someone's going to fall. I am fully on board with Martin right now as it presently stands today. I think he's going to interview. I think he's going to hit it out of the park. Corn-fed kid, from a farm, just
farm
like
guy.
When you watch him play, he doesn't do anything awesome, but he doesn't do anything poorly either. He's really good at pretty much everything.
If Pagula's in those interviews, he's going to be like, a farm
he's
kid.
Have his pet. Yeah.
He's like, a farm kid saved my football team. Maybe.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, right? That's right. Yeah.
He's like, maybe I need a farm kid to save my hockey team.
Yeah, and they got back Malenstein too from the hop farm. He came
That's
in.
Right.
Yeah, he's but then so I think that
Brooklyn hop farm, right?
I'm something like that. Yeah, yeah. Anyways, but Martone could fall, not all the way to 9, but someone's gonna fall. My last thing I'll say about Eklund, and we have a lot of time to talk about this, and I get fired. See, I get fired up when we talk about this stuff. Okay. The Sabres fans will hate a Victor Eklund pick, and I totally get it. And the redundancy, maybe in terms of his metrics, I don't know who he's redundant with, though, in the Sabres prospect ranks right now. Oslin? Maybe? I don't know exactly who he's redundant with. I really don't know.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, okay, but from a size standpoint, there is that. I mean, it's like Benson, right? Like he's tiny,
firecracker,
but
dude.
But he doesn't play small, but he is still small, right? There are some limitations to Benson because he is small.
I'm not advocating him for the Sabres pick, Matt. I'm not. I'm just saying, because I would understand Sabres fans being upset about it. I'm just saying I wouldn't give a shit if they took him.
Well, you do have to have a balance of recognizing where there might be some crossover and redundancy in your system, while also not passing over a potential difference maker. And he's going to be an interesting one throughout the draft process because, his teammate seems like a top 5 lock, but it's like who was carrying who here, right? Like, and there's always wild cards. Somebody that goes higher than you expected, and maybe that he's that guy because Bob McKenzie's survey of scouts seems like he's got some fans, and so I really strongly considered him at 9. I just couldn't quite do it, given that Martin was there. That Martin and what he brings felt like there's just a culture element to that. Now, of course, this kid's most likely not going to play next year, but it starts in the prospect ranks. We've talked about that before. It's not just that they haven't built the team that way in pro scouting and in free agency and in trades. They haven't done it enough in the prospect ranks, and they've missed chances to do it on multiple occasions. So now, having some of that element, you don't necessarily, I know you've said this before, like you don't draft for that in the first round, but it helps when it comes in a skill package too, right? You're drafting for grit and character on day 2, but when you have it in a skill package, you see the difference it makes with, the Kachuk brothers and players like that. Not to say that this kid's going to be, the next Kachuk, but that he is, just a fearless player like that. You can't coach that into a guy. A guy's not going to really develop that too much down the line. When he has it at 18, it's definitely a green flag.
Best thing that happens is McQueen goes. I would argue maybe the best thing that happens is someone does go to like a Brady Martin at 5. You want a couple things to happen that maybe pushes Martone down. Martone is still, I think, the best case scenario in the top 10. Like if he fell to the Sabres, best case scenario. Low probability, best case scenario. I want to go back to your comment. We're an hour in. Thanks everyone for hopping in. We're not quite done yet with the show tonight. We're going to keep going. You mentioned trading. I do think that that's on the table. Trading down, certainly on the table. My strategy for this draft, and by the way, there probably is, well, not probably, pretty damn sure at this point. I'm not 100% sure that this is going to be the case until I'm done with it. Draft preview will be article series on Twitter this year. Full breakdown, old school sabresprospects.com style draft preview, historical perspective. A lot of work's already done. I've got players identified at every pick based on certain things. We're 4 or 5 deep at each selection. They got 10 picks. It's gonna be fun. Okay. Oh, and I got a couple guys too. We talk about shopping at the asshole aisle. You gotta have a couple ding dongs there, because they have 3 7th rounders this year. I got a couple ding dongs.
You gotta, like you said, you've gotta do it through the draft. Like you have to start building it organizationally and start to build a different mindset and not just constantly be trying to add as much skill as possible.
But I do want to, so I just wanted to get a plug in for that. But no, there's going to be, you're going to see a theme when we start talking about some of these players, especially on day 2. I do believe that's how you improve your culture. So the trade down, if you go back 5 picks, 4 picks, it's the idea is, because what did I text you over the weekend, Matt, when I was sitting down working on this here at my desk? I texted you and I said, do you remember what I said? I said, ideally, the Sabres will get another 2nd round pick. And that's an objective.
They moved down, a few spots to get one last year?
Yeah, I think you do that again if you can. But, I'm not going to forecast that scenario in this preview, but that should be an objective here. But it brings me to one of the things that I teed up at the top. Lottery night happens. San Jose goes in number 1. Going into the lottery, and you look at their roster, you look at their prospect ranks, and they could probably afford to add another defenseman.
Oh, San Jose. Yeah.
They
I'm
lose.
sorry. I'm trying to
Yeah,
look up the pronunciation of a few of these prospects because they deserve it
they
to have
they
these
look
the pronunciations right.
who Hunter
But
Brustevich. You going with that one?
Aitchison. Am I pronouncing Aitchison properly?
Kayshawn Aitchison.
Yeah, he's a
Yes,
name that's getting
Kayshawn
brought up in the
Aitchison.
chat a lot, so I wanted to
Oh,
make sure I
love
had his
him.
pronunciation right. And is he somebody as high as 9 that you could see, or is that maybe if you move down? Not to
Another
derail
guy.
the other conversation, but
No. We'll get there. Another guy that he was like Martin, in different position. Rose up all year, left shot D, likes to join the play, always rotating down low, back door, fearless in terms of physicality. So really, really awesome second half of the year. I would say his last 2/3 of his season were excellent, just excellent. Shot up draft boards for good reason, similar to Martin's rise. Left shot though. Okay. Now, when you look in the cupboard, by the way, you're probably stacked better on righties than you are lefties, believe it or not. If you're the
in the
Sabres, in terms of the prospect ranks,
Yeah,
in terms of the
absolutely.
prospect ranks. But at the same time, you have Darlene Young, Power Young, Bo Byram Young, a couple other guys.
Which brings you to your point.
Which brings me to my point. So thank you. But yeah, Kayshawn Aitchison, love him, but I don't know right now, right? So with San Jose falling out and they slide down to 2, I'm sure they'd love to take Misa, but don't you think maybe they could use another young defenseman? Don't you make the call? Would you consider making the call to Mike Greer and say, hey, what are you open for business at 2? I got some young D. You want to talk, centering a deal around 2 for one of my young D, not named Rasmus Dahlin? And it brings me to this kind of Owen or Bowen conversation.
And we've discussed, we touched on this pretty early in the season, I think, sort of recognizing, it might even been before that, but at some point during the season, I remember bringing this up of who would you rather have long term, or who would you rather trade? Those are actually 2 different questions, because in a vacuum, maybe you'd want to have Power long term over Byram, but maybe you'd also rather trade Power. Maybe they're close enough and Power can get you more that, Power's already under contract. He's, a number 1 overall pick. I think he's I think he's a better trade asset. I don't know if he'll be a better player long term than Bowen Byram. I think there's some concerning metrics with Bowen Byram in terms of how he played with Rasmus Dahlin and how he played away from Rasmus Dahlin. However, I will also say, outside of Rasmus Dahlin, who did he have to play with? Right? So I don't want to knock him too much for that, but it is a little bit of a red flag in terms of, can this guy carry his own, pair? Can he
be the guy? Right.
Right.
Well, they have Dickinson also coming up, down the road, but they got to kind of build you still need 6 guys. Anthony S says San Jose isn't trading out of the spot where they can get Misa. Maybe. I'm just saying, make the call. And I'm not saying, I want to know if they're open for business. And I'm not saying it's even 1 for 1. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, are they open for business on 2? Can I interest you over here? Choose your own adventure. Owen Power, Bowen Byron, and what else? And how do we build a deal off of this concept? That's all I'm saying. You got to make the call, Anthony. Got to make the call.
The only problem I have, getting Misa would be fantastic, right? I think was the big intrigue of the lottery. It was the big intrigue for me in general at the end of the season, watching the odds and how they were shifting, because Misa, Hagens, Martone, that tier of player, really Misa and Hagens, those are difference-making forwards, I think. And to end up in the realm of drafting one of them would certainly be a shot in the arm for a prospect pool that is, they're the youngest team in hockey, so a lot of their prospects have graduated, whereas in other systems that are inflated in these rankings because guys haven't graduated. But still, you look at guys that aren't yet in the NHL, and there aren't a lot of sure things. Whereas, Misa would or Hagens feel like they would be pretty close to that. But I'm still, if I'm opening the door to Power or Byram, I'm opening that door. I'm doing a Kris Drury where he, I don't know if it was a
Yeah,
group
you're sending the memo
text he sent out or an email, or maybe they have a Discord channel. I'm not sure how they do it, but saying, hey,
Yeah.
Jacob Trouba, Chris Kreider, come and get him. I would be sending out those feelers on Byram, Power, seeing what's out there,
Yeah, you're not
because
doing the Anthony Davis. Like the Lakers only called
secret
Dallas.
trade, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
let's just get let's just call one team on one of the best players in the NBA. Smart.
See, I pay
Smart
more
move.
attention. I pay attention to more than just hockey allsvenskan. Okay.
I don't pay a ton of attention to the NBA, but it was hard not to pay attention to the Luka Doncic trade. That was a wild story. But yeah, you have to canvas the league, because I think if you dangled Bowen Byram, what I don't like about the Sharks as a trade partner is that I don't see a lot of talent on their NHL roster that they would be willing to part with that could really help the Sabres or really balance the scale in a trade like that. If you're talking about moving from 2 to 9, say, I mean, if it was a straight up deal, maybe, that I don't know if Bo Byram quite fetches you the number 2 pick, but if you dangle Bo Byram to Calgary, can you get one of those righties, Rasmus Anderson or Mackenzie Weegar? Can you start to build a package in a trade that way? That's more interesting to me. I think getting a high pick would be fun. You don't see it happen a lot, right? Those really high picks moving just doesn't seem to happen, but it doesn't happen until it does, right? That's sort of the rule in
It's
general in
hard,
sports.
but you got to make the call, is what I'm saying. And by the way, what if the Sabres have Misa as number 1 on their board?
Right.
Which they might.
I think some teams will. I would think some teams will.
100%. 100%.
I mean, he's a pretty awesome player. And the idea that he was clearly number 2 all year was sort of puzzling to me as it went deeper, that Schaefer was just this clear-cut number 1, especially when he wasn't playing. Both awesome players, but Misa had a phenomenal season. I see some people in the chat saying trade both. Trade Power and Byram.
You can't do that, because like you trade one of them. The idea is also, so like with Power, okay, what is his AAV? 8 and change?
8.3.
Okay, that gives you, so what did we talk about last week, or maybe it was the week before when we were together? Like you're already kind of forecasting yourself up against like the cap in a way pretty quickly here, at least next season. This allows you have to make other deals then. You want to talk about changing your culture? We talked about that. I just think there's calls that you make on all these guys. They're all currency. Trade both is aggressive, but trade one is realistic. And I'm not against either if you can make your team better. The problem I have though is like trading like one of these defensemen for Michael Misa doesn't make you immediately better. So it's really about what you do after that. How do you use the space from Power? Misa makes you better down the road. I'm just throwing it out there.
No, it's good,
Just
good chatter, and it's a call that you make. I think rather than trading 2 defensemen, to your point, to me the move would be trade one of the defensemen and trade a forward, at least one. Whether that's Dangle and Peterka to see what type of, and again, the Peterka thing is similar to Power for me. It's about the fact that he would get you a big return at this point in time. Not necessarily that I don't like the player or don't think, he's good, but getting a big return to really change your mix, Peterka would be one of those players. Jack Quinn to me is also just not in that same bucket as far as would get you a big return, but a guy that I'm interested in trying to get something for, because he's still got some of that draft pedigree lingering, right? A top 10 pick. He had some really promising early results. Injuries derailed him. There's the Buffalo funk hanging over him that teams probably think if they get him out, there's still some value there. Value enough to get the type of piece that you need. You're not talking about trading Jack Quinn to get probably not getting your top 4 defenseman for Jack Quinn. Maybe, I don't know. Probably not like a bona fide stud in that spot, but maybe you're getting another character forward to round out your lineup. An older player with more experience that an older team that's maybe trying to retool is looking to move on from. Maybe you can build a package around Quinn and get something like that. Maybe, after the year Peyton Krebs had, hanging on to a job all year and showing some, stuff as far as being a defensive, forward. Maybe he has a little bit of value as a sweetener and like right? If we're talking about Calgary, right? Byram, Krebs, what does that get you? How far down the road to a Rasmus Anderson does that get you? That, to me, makes more sense than taking this place where you have too much of something, and then you'd go to a place where, look, you trade Power and Byram. You know who Kevin's throwing in the lineup, right? Bryson.
Bryson. I was gonna say I was going JBD.
I mean,
I just wanted to say it, but JBD's already in the lineup. He's already in the lineup.
JBD's already there. I mean, as far as lefties on your depth chart, of course they would replace Power and Byram with somebody, right? Like you do have Matthias Samuelsson, so he could move down, but you'd be creating more work when, seeing what Bo Byram could do with some power play minutes, more power play minutes, sort of running his own unit. That would be, to me, the potential appeal of dangling a Power in a trade. I don't think his injury will really matter too much in trade talks. I mean, if they
31 other teams.
That road. That's what Kevyn Adams said. 31 other teams would take Owen Power. Would they? Of course.
And I think I agree with him.
Of course.
Well, yeah.
What would they give up?
Yeah, but maybe not at 8 and change, right?
Maybe not at 8 and change, and what they would give up is what matters, right? Everybody would take him if you waived him, right? But would everybody part with something substantial? And what exactly is that price? I think it's worth finding out. I think it's worth finding out really on just about all your players. Probably minus Rasmus Dahlin and probably Tage Thompson too. But you've got to do your due diligence on almost everybody else to figure out what's out there. In fact, if you're talking about trading 2 defensemen, you're probably looking at one of Byram and Power, and then Samuelsson would be the other one that you'd be interested in trying to move for the number and the way that he's played. So yeah, we'll see how seriously they go down that road, but it does feel like they've reached a point where they have to make a decision on Byram. And I don't know that it's up in the air. It feels like whether he's back.
It's risky, because we've talked about using these guys, moving them in deals to make your team better, and you're not making your team immediately better by moving one in a deal for 2. You're not immediately, but I think you got to make calls. You just got to see what's out there. I really do think that Mike Greer's not going to hang up on you. He's going to think about it. If you call and you offer one of these guys, he's going to think about it. But your option, calling Vancouver, calling Calgary, calling whoever, calling the Rangers should be wide open. There's all these other GMs said, I got to keep my options open. Pittsburgh, got to keep my options open, right? We can't sit here and say, look, like last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, like it's very disappointing if they don't do major surgery and like have a blockbuster or 2, one at the forward ranks, one at the defenseman, and not think of things like this. But you got to have a strategy. Every deal is connected. So a defenseman for like a 2 overall, which is crazy. I know. If it happens, it's what's the domino, the next domino. They're all connected. You're evaluating the offseason as a whole. So I don't know. Just want to throw it out there. I think it's compelling.
That's where a senior advisor, I think, can be of value in seeing the big picture and seeing how the puzzle pieces need to come together, identifying certain types of players that will help the locker room, because I feel like Kevyn Adams has just misfired on some of those types of additions. He relied heavily, it seemed like, on Don Granato at times for, his history, guys he had coached at the program or had familiarity with. And it, there's mixed results there, I think. And I don't know if that was so much the case with Lindy Ruff. They didn't seem to bring in guys that necessarily had experience with him, but the familiarity thing was something with Eric Johnson and Kyle Okposo. Kind of, I just feel like he's missed on some of these veteran leadership. There haven't been enough of them. Zucker is probably the big hit that he's had. Clifton has been a nice addition to the room from a character standpoint, but has definitely been uneven on the ice. So that's where I do feel like a senior advisor could help pave the road of the offseason a little bit for somebody like Adams and just have a different voice, not make the same mistake repeatedly, which seems like they've done the last few years.
You still got that game on in your office? What's the score?
4-3 Toronto with 7:45 left. My stream might be a few minutes behind, but
Okay.
Closing in on a 2-0 series lead for the Leafs. But 7:45, it's a lot of time left, as we've seen in these NHL playoffs.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. All right, Matthew. I'm good. We're an hour 20 in. I think we covered a lot of ground tonight. Anything in the chat that you want to get to quickly before we get out of here?
I laughed at this when we were talking about Bryson going into the lineup. It's Rickus says that's if Bryson is fine with going into the lineup because he's, okay with not playing, as Kevyn Adams highlighted as one of his
important
strengths.
Matt, you got to have guys that are comfortable not playing. They're happy to not play.
Right.
They're just happy to be here. You got to have those guys.
Ryan Durkham points out one of the weakest pieces of Kevyn's entire tenure has been relying on coaches for pro scouting and searching far and wide, rather than searching far and wide for the best players, I think is what he's talking about there. And it's what I mentioned with Granato. And the danger in doing that, right, is that you fire the coach. You change coaches so quickly in the NHL that, how many of these guys that Don Granato liked don't necessarily fit, or that Don Granato and Kevyn Adams together, liked in their vision of how this was going to look. That's the biggest problem with the whole thing, is just a consistency of vision, or any vision at all, right? Going back to Kevyn Adams and Ralph Kruger were going to be the ones to steer them out of this. And then Don Granato is sort of his co-pilot, and they're building the team to fit that fast style of play. And then Lindy Ruff's your coach, and you got some guys that clearly don't fit. So there's a danger in doing that. And that's why some of these additions to the front office, or right now just one singular addition, can't be a bad thing. David Dietz said if Stahl works as hard as Spezza did in Toronto and now Pittsburgh, it could work. We just have no patience for it. And that, I think, is a big piece of what ails the Sabres right now, is that they have absolutely worn out their welcome in terms of patience. I mean, the fact that people were as patient as they were, or as willing to be patient as they were at the beginning of the Kevyn Adams era, or at least a year into it, after the first year went so badly. And then, Don Granato started to inject some life into the team a little bit. The fact that people were willing to jump on board and be patient with that was honestly incredible, and a testament to the fan base. And the fact that they blew it when they had the 91-point season and then did a whole lot of nothing that summer is why they are where they are right now, in terms of a fan base that has no patience, who's not even going to hardly look at any move they make and think it's the right move, because they don't trust any of the people, or the two main people calling the shots. So I think it's a good point by Dietz that, if you evaluate Stahl in a vacuum and on his track record, like, there's a chance for this to be an impactful hire. But people don't have the patience to watch Eric Stahl develop into a quality front office guy when they just want to make the playoffs. And making the playoffs should not be as hard as it has been around here.
It's been tricky. It's been tricky. Anything else, or is that it?
Those were the few that I started. It was moving so fast tonight that I
know. Same here. It's kind of hard when it's moving that quick. Well, what did we learn? Chad, you can tell us what we learned tonight. We learned that Terry Pagula seems to be willing to build out his bench in the front office, or maybe Kevyn is willing to create some competition for himself if this was his idea. We learned that the Sabres, the luck of this franchise, I wouldn't say they're cursed, but the luck of the Sabres did prove to rear its ugly head again on lottery night, moving down 2 slots. We looked at, let's see what else. I don't know what else we learned. It's been a long day. I want to get
Say
down
we
and watch
learned
some hockey, man.
we learned some stuff about these draft prospects from the world's foremost draft expert here. So that was good. We got you fired up.
Oh yeah, no, I'm ready to like go again, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna keep the hose kinked for now. But there is a lot to talk about, with the draft. I'm really excited to talk about those. We're gonna put plenty of work into really kind of dissecting. I think 9 a little bit more as more. Just there's gonna be a lot to talk about. We got a lot of runway, but I'm really excited about dissecting like those first 2 or 3 picks that they're going to make on day 2. I think that's where they've fallen short historically, and there's opportunity. There's some really good opportunity there to get some energy and grit into the pipeline where it's lacking right now. But I think that's it, man. I'm good. Matthew, you did a little recap of the day's front office activity at theathletic.com/Sabres. You got anything else cooking that you want to plug, or should we just kind of let things happen organically?
Yeah, there'll be more stuff to come. There always is. I'm not going anywhere, and I've been busy. So there's stories I've been working on. Some Sabres, some not. Some that I've been working on for a while, and there'll be more off-season type stuff rolling out here as I dig into. I've got some draft options up. That was from pre-lottery. We've got the mock draft. We've got the news and notes of what happened today, and we'll continue to dig into everything that happens with this team because I'm endlessly fascinated by it, which is good. In my line of work.
You said the F word. I think it's going to be a fascinating offseason. It's going to be for the Sabres. It's going to be a fascinating draft, and hopefully we produce some fascinating podcasts here on the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. For Matthew Fairburn, for the production crew who wants to thank everyone in the chat for showing up tonight. We appreciate it. I made it subscribers only because I want you to subscribe to this channel. Enough freebies. It's free to subscribe, but let's get some subscription buttons hitting there, subscribing to the channel. So thanks for people that joined the fracas tonight. I'm Kris Baker. We'll see you again next time.